You're listening to the Westminster-Canterbury Tales podcast, creating community to foster joy and well-being. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to Tell Me a Story at Westminster-Canterbury on Chesapeake Bay. And today we have Janet with us, and I'm going to try to say her last name, Pawlukiewicz.
Perfect.
Oh my goodness, that's a mistake, I'm sure. But you've helped me, and I appreciate that. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, what we want to do today is just have you tell us a little bit about your life, where you're born, where you grew up, and some of the things that helped shape you as a family and as a person in your identity. So tell us, where were you born?
Well, I was born in Ridley Park, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
My parents were living in Philadelphia at the time. I had two older brothers, and later a younger sister came along.
Okay.
When I was an infant, the family moved to Long Island, and I grew up in Syosset, which is in the town of Oyster Bay in Nassau County, sort of halfway out the island on the North Shore.
Mm-hmm.
And spent my whole life up until I left for college in the same house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, really nice little neighborhood, and we enjoyed, getting to the beach and Long Island Sound, or sometimes going down to Jones Beach.
Yeah.
My father ran a restaurant in Brooklyn, so he had to leave most days after he got us off to school. So I remember him coming into my bedroom and saying, "Rise and shine," and then making me breakfast in the morning. And then he would get on the train, the Long Island Railroad. He was a big train enthusiast.
Uh-huh.
And he had a huge, big model train set.
Oh, wow.
In the basement that we played with a lot. And we would go on great long vacations because we didn't see much of him during the week.
Yeah. Now, how long of a train trip was it into Brooklyn to where the restaurant was?
I think probably about an hour.
Okay. So an hour there and an hour back every day, and he had to spend a lot of time at the restaurant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't get home till we were in bed.
Mm-hmm.
Or as when I got older and could stay up later, I remember him coming home, and he would just stand and watch TV, and he literally would fall asleep while standing up sometimes. But the restaurant that he ran had a long history in my family and an even longer history.
Yeah, so let's tell us about that, because I know that's important to you, and it's important to your family and shaping their life and their identity. So the restaurant started before your family got involved, and tell us who started it and when they started it. And, something I think our listeners would really like to know is that it is still there today, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's
and
pretty amazing.
It was closed for a while, but it's open again. Yeah. Okay, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. When did it start?
Yeah, so it started in 1879.
Uh-huh.
It was started by Mr. Gage, and a couple of years later, Mr. Tallner joined him, and the restaurant became being known as Gage and Tallner.
And this is a famous restaurant that a lot of people went to all through.
And a lot of famous people went to it, too.
Yeah. Can you name a couple?
Well, early on, for instance, Lillian Russell went there.
Sure.
With Diamond Jim Brady,
oh, wow.
the big railroad tycoon, and very prodigious eater, evidently. There are stories about him, just dozens of oysters, and then, a couple steaks and, that kind of amount of eating. Later on, Woody Allen used to come regularly in his white limousine.
Oh, wow.
I think, who is it?
The Dodgers used to come.
Oh, yeah. Right. I forgot about them.
The Brooklyn Dodgers at that time,
at one point,
right?
when I was in college, I guess, or maybe a little later, the Brooklyn Dodgers had a reunion at Gage and Tallner's because they used to eat there all the time. So the 1955 World Series winning team came to the restaurant.
Wow.
And that was pretty exciting.
That had to be fun, yeah.
Yeah.
How long did your dad run the restaurant?
My dad ran the restaurant for 40 years.
Yeah.
From the time I was born, or a few months after I was born, to when he retired in 1989. My mom worked there, too. She was the bookkeeper.
Okay.
And before my dad ran it, my grandfather ran it. And he started working there in 1919. And
when did the restaurant open up?
The restaurant opened in 1879.
1879. And so your family became involved, your grandfather first, for many years, and then your father.
And my grandfather, his partner was his father, my great-grandfather.
Oh, my.
And my great-grandfather also gives me an interesting tie to the Mayflower.
Okay.
Because his wife was Sophie Bradford.
Okay.
And she came from the William Bradford line.
All right. And so you can go follow your family, trace your family history all the way back to the Mayflower. That's impressive. That's cool.
So
I like that.
So they had, my grandfather and his father had pretty good credentials for working in the restaurant business and taking over the restaurant, because they'd had a restaurant themselves in New York. It maybe was sort of like the first wine bar. They really liked wine.
Okay.
In fact, they had started a wine company in Ohio. And at one point, their wines won awards in an international exposition in Paris, things like that. So they did pretty well. They continued to make wines and sell wines until the Prohibition came along, of course.
Sure.
And that got shut down. And so they were very clever. What they did is they decided to make medical remedies that use their wine. So eventually, basically it was snake oil.
Yeah.
They combined wine with olive oil and iron to create what they called dew, because of the dewy wines, dew ferrol, like fur for the iron part of it, ferrous, and ol for olive oil.
Okay.
They combined those three, and they also made one called dew tone, which was phosphates with Madeira. And they touted that to relieve nervous indigestion. And their directions were to have one glass of wine between meals to get rid of these maladies that people would have. And then at the end of Prohibition, my grandfather was able to secure a commitment from the local Evergreen Brewery owner, George Trommer, to send his first delivery ever in Brooklyn to Gage and Tolner's.
Oh, that's great.
And evidently quite a celebration was held. You don't think of Ohio wines?
I don't think of Ohio wines at all.
Yeah, this actually still thriving business in the Great Lakes area of wine.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think of California when I think of wine.
Yeah,
Sonoma
exactly.
Valley.
But I think pretty much every state has wine now.
Yeah.
Yeah. My father got it, and he had actually been trained as an engineer.
Okay.
But he needed to take over because his father had passed away. His mother had run it for a while, and she just needed a break. So he took it over, and
now he took it over when he was pretty young.
Yeah, he was 30.
He was 30, and so you were born in Philadelphia, and you didn't live there very long because right after you were born, your dad moved the family to Long Island, New York, and
That's
then
exactly
he worked in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So then, we were in Long Island for, as I said, my whole high school.
What was it like growing up in Long Island at that time?
Well, I think I was very fortunate because there was a lot of care given by the community to make sure the schools were excellent.
Okay.
So I felt like I got a really good education there. We had a pool. I'm a swimmer. I've always liked swimming. So I became a lifeguard.
Oh, my. How fun.
And we had a couple acres of land, so we had a fair amount to explore on right there. But right down the way from us, there was a little pond. Oh. And I think that's what sort of inspired my interest in natural history.
Yeah. So when you went to college, what was your first undergrad degree in?
In biology.
In biology.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so.
But then you went on to graduate school.
I went on to graduate school after. Well, there was a delayed time in between. I went to work first. I worked as a seamstress for a while. A waitress for a while.
We all have those memories. Most of us do.
Oh, and I shouldn't skip that. In college, I met my husband, and he was also in natural sciences. We were in classes together. We sang together in Gilbert and Sullivan productions.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, how fun!
Yeah.
Have you done that recently?
I still sing. Yeah, I've sung all my life too.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But not Gilbert and Sullivan anymore.
Oh.
That takes too much acting too. But after college, I worked for a little while and then went back to graduate school for both music and teaching degree.
Okay.
A further graduate program in music. But
and where did you go for that?
Also to Long Island University.
Okay.
But I did not complete that because we started a family.
All right.
And then we decided we wanted to get off Long Island. We were tired of Long Island.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a one-way street, you know.
That's right.
You get caught up in traffic a lot, and there's no way to get off it except back through the city. So we wound up coming down to Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And after a while, I got a job at the Smithsonian.
Wow.
So
what was your job there?
I worked in the Museum of Natural History.
Oh, that sounds like it's one of my favorite museums. Yeah. I love going there.
Yeah. It's a great place. I started off in a place called the Marine Sorting Center.
Okay.
And
what did they do?
They analyze collections that are taken, mostly oceanographic collections that are taken.
Of specimens of marine life and
exactly,
things like that?
and catalog them.
Yeah.
And that was my job, to sort through microscopic
I would
collections of
do that for
microscopic
free,
creatures.
I think, because it sounds like so much fun.
Well,
You got
I learned
paid
a lot
for
in
it.
the beginning, but it gets a little tedious after a while.
Okay. Yeah, I guess anything
So then
does.
I moved over into the exhibits programs, and I worked there for a while.
Doing?
Well, there was an exhibit called the Discovery Room. It was a family exhibit, and it focused on hands-on exhibits.
Oh, wow. So you got to organize that and help guide that?
Well, we had a lot of volunteers who worked for us because it was open all the hours of the museum. And we also worked closely with various curators in the museum to develop new hands-on activities for that room. And I started to realize that people were getting a lot out of this, not just children. The adults were getting a lot out of it. They really appreciated being able to touch, handle, and explore things in more depth. And so I started focusing on that more, and eventually I got a fellowship to go back to school.
Okay.
In public administration.
And you did that?
I did that under the James Webb, the James Webb Telescope?
Sure.
Well, he also established a fellowship program for people who worked in the Smithsonian.
Oh, that's great.
And that's
and where'd
how
you
I
go
went
to
back
school?
To George Washington University.
George Washington University.
And,
good school.
Yeah.
Right there in D.C., right downtown.
So I was able to go to school instead of work, and I still got paid.
Oh, man, I've never quite figured that one out. I'd be really a rich man today if I did, because I was in school so long. I think I was just a slow learner.
It was a great program, and ironically, my husband was just finishing up a similar fellowship.
Oh, wow.
At Maryland.
Okay.
University of Maryland.
And what did he do?
So he was also in environmental studies, and he was an environmental planner.
Okay, great.
So when I finished that work, the master's degree in public administration, I was focusing on evaluation because I wanted to do more like pilot testing of exhibits as they were developed in the museum, and also try to promote more hands-on exhibits. And I had made a commitment to come back and work at the Smithsonian for a certain number of years to repay that fellowship. And I came back, and I kind of got thwarted, to be honest. I wasn't able to convince people that hands-on exhibits were good, especially computer-based exhibits. I did very early computer-based exhibits that, for instance, one was called Design a Shell. And it would take the Fibonacci series is something that all shells are designed with by the animals that create them. So there's certain rules about how shells will curl based on their length and width. And so we had a little program where you could look at these beautiful shells and put in the numbers that those shells used and create that shell on the computer program,
Oh,
or you
wow.
could put in your own numbers and see what your shell looked like. And it
That
didn't
sounds
fly.
wonderful.
It didn't
my.
fly. And then, so I started looking for another job, and I wound up going to the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency.
Okay.
And shortly after I left, they hired a new director of exhibits who started that kind of program off. So I just missed
Took your
the timing
idea
a
and
little
ran with it.
But I went there right after the Exxon Valdez oil spill,
Oh, yeah.
and that was my job at first at EPA.
Oh, really?
Was part of the restoration program for the Exxon Valdez up in
Wow.
Alaska. So
Yeah.
and right before I left the Smithsonian, we got a letter from the Homer Museum in Alaska asking if the Smithsonian would make their exhibit that they had done on the oil spill, which was really a nice little exhibit, if we would take it as a Smithsonian traveling exhibit. So my boss there, who didn't have the funds to do that, said, why don't you take this to the EPA and see if they'll do it? And I was able to get that done.
Oh, that's
It
great.
was really great.
Oh, fun.
And
Yeah.
it became a successful traveling exhibit.
That's good.
Very hands-on, by the way.
Yeah. All right. I get that idea. So how long did you work for the EPA?
So then I worked for another 20 years.
20 years.
For the EPA in the water program.
Okay.
And I worked on mostly on watershed protection programs like here at the Lynnhaven River.
Yep.
And then I moved over to the drinking water program. And at the end of my career, I wound up serving in a field that I never expected to serve in, which is water security. Because,
Which is?
well, after the attacks of 9/11, there was great concern that water systems might be attacked. And,
Okay.
for instance, reservoirs might be poisoned or whatever
Sure.
as a means of attacking the U.S.
Right.
And so we started up a whole brand new program working with both the drinking water utilities and the wastewater utilities in the United States to be better prepared.
So you're testing the water regularly, or they do that?
Oh, yeah. Well, of course,
That's part of
drinking
that.
water supplies have to test the water all the time.
But then you have
But what we
alternatives.
focused on primarily was emergency response as well.
Okay.
And new tools and ways to change your operations to make them more secure, things like that.
It's good to know the government is forward thinking like that.
Yeah.
That gives me a degree of comfort that.
And then at the very, very end of my career, I kind of went back and connected the two, the drinking water. It turns out that lots of communities will fund land conservation efforts in order to protect their water supply, either the drinking water supply or just their fresh water, so that they can have recreation there and fish and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And so I joined the Trust for Public Land.
Okay.
To try to bring some of the drinking water interests into that work
Okay.
at the Trust for Public Land.
So that's what you did at the end of your career.
Right.
Okay. So I want us to go back and talk about the restaurant, because that's such a big part of your growing up and of your larger family life. And it's just such an interesting feature of our culture that you have a restaurant that exists for over 100 years in one form or another. Tell us a little bit more about the restaurant business.
It was a steak and chop house.
Okay.
That's how it was known, but lots and lots of fresh seafood too. So actually had its sort of subtitle varied over the years, from steak and chop house to oyster and chop house, things like that. It was an absolutely beautiful building inside and out, right in the heart of downtown Brooklyn, in between the fancier shopping areas and the courthouse area.
So you'd have a lot of judges and lawyers and people like that visiting.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And also people shopping.
Oh, okay.
And the building itself, the interior was fairly long and narrow, but it was lined on each side with these spectacular mirrors, arched mirrors, and deep burgundy red velvet panels, cut velvet panels between the mirrors, all the mirrors were framed with dark cherry wood. And the outside was quite beautiful too. And so actually, while my father was in charge, he worked with the New York City Landmark Preservation Commission. And he was able to get the restaurant designated as a landmark in around 1974, I believe.
Okay.
And both inside and out. It was only the third interior to be designated a landmark in New York City.
That's amazing.
After the New York Public Library
Sure.
and Grant's Tomb.
Oh, wow.
And it's the only restaurant that has both designations, inside and out.
All right.
Because it was such a good example of gay 90s decor.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. The waiters all wore cutaway suits with hash marks on their shoulders to designate how many years they'd worked there. So for 1 year, they'd get a bar.
Yeah.
And for 5 years, they'd get a star. And for 25 years, they'd get an eagle.
Wow.
And I'm trying to remember the date now, but there was one guy, Leon, who I remember as a child being greeted by Leon, who worked there for 50 years.
Oh, my
They
goodness.
celebrated his 50th anniversary working there. He had 2 eagles.
For anybody working any job for 50 years is amazing, but to work in that, because it's a difficult and takes a toll on your body.
Yeah.
To that kind of work. Oh, how exciting.
And they did not use any trays. They did all their service on their arm.
Oh, wow.
So they would come out. I remember as a kid just being amazed to watch them carry, like 4 or 5 dishes on their arm. Because it had narrow walkways, they really couldn't have trays.
Yeah.
And they had some very interesting food. They had one that was kind of very risque when it was first put on the menu, called belly broils.
I like the name.
and they were clams. They were just the very tender part of soft clams.
Okay.
Put back in the shell and broiled with some butter and breadcrumbs.
Oh, my.
Simple preparation, but delicious.
You're making me hungry. You do know. I'm going to dinner after this.
It was all cooked on anthracite coal. And
At what would you call it?
hard coal.
Hard coal.
Yeah, I remember that there was a big, in the sidewalk outside, there were the big doors that would open, and they would actually just come and the coal would be sent down into the basement.
Oh, wow.
And there were big walk-in refrigerators down there, and
Okay.
so all the food went down through there and then up. And
Who did most of the buying of the food?
Well, that was interesting because there was always a really careful attention to the quality and preparation of the food from when Gage and Tallner first owned it on. And my father used to actually go to the fish markets every day and buy food.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. He would go and check out what was the best quality food.
Gage and Tallner has been around for a while.
Well, when it closed down temporarily, it was 125 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now it's still going.
It started in 1879, so it turns out that it's older than both the Brooklyn Bridge and the Statue of Liberty. So after Gage and Tallner's had a big 100th anniversary celebration, a few years later, they also honored the Brooklyn Bridge and the Statue of Liberty by putting out little souvenir glasses, rocks glasses, that had both of them on there, and very clearly pointed out that Gage and Tallner's was older.
I love it. That's a great story. Thanks. Now, you correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a famous chef for many years at that restaurant. Am I right?
Yeah, there was Edna Lewis, who was a very famous African-American chef who specialized in Southern cooking. Okay. There's actually a postage stamp with her on it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she worked there for a while after my father sold it. The next owner brought her in. So my father worked there for 40 years, as I think we said.
Yeah.
When he retired, 2 different restaurateurs came in and took it over for a while. And unfortunately, in 2004, it shut its doors. on Valentine's Day.
Oh,
that was the
no.
last dinner.
That was not a happy Valentine's
for all
Day.
of us.
Yeah.
We were so, it was so much a part of our life. We were really kind of heartbroken. But, and then it became, because of the designation as a landmark, the walls and the beautiful gas chandeliers had to be protected.
Okay.
And they eventually built an inner shell to use it for other purposes besides the restaurant. But before that, it became the world's fanciest TGI Fridays.
Oh, no.
And then it was an Arby's.
Oh, I can't.
And fast forward to like 2016.
Yeah.
I'm now retired. Both of my parents have passed away, and I'm preparing to move here to Westminster-Canterbury. And I have literally boxes full of photographs, menus, artifacts, magazine articles, newspaper articles about the restaurant. And a friend of mine developed an interest in it because of Edna Lewis, actually.
Oh, okay.
And he came, and we spent a whole day looking through these artifacts together. And he said, you ought to donate these to the Brooklyn Historical Society. And I went, bingo.
That's great.
This is how I'm going to not have to try to fit them into my small apartment here.
All right.
And so I donated them to the Brooklyn Historical Society. And literally a few days after they put those into the collection, a couple restaurateurs from Brooklyn came along and recognized the building and decided to try to reopen Gage and Tallner's.
Oh, that's great. What a good story of restoration.
and they managed to do it. They used the information they found in the Historical Society. I actually became a little bit of a consultant for them. And they reopened. They were supposed to reopen in 2020, March of 2020, but they got a major halt in their plans because of COVID.
Yeah.
And they finally were able to reopen in 2021, and they're doing very well.
Oh, that's great. That's just a wonderful story of restoration of something you thought had passed on, and it's resurrected, and that's great.
Yeah.
Wow, how exciting. And it's good to know that somebody very serious, restaurateur, is running that restaurant. And
and they're keeping up the quality and everything. They're sort of keeping up just...
Well, they have to because of the historical value of the building and of the inside.
So they're now gathering some of the same kinds of acclamations as my father did back in the 70s. Oh, no, I guess starting in, I think it was 56 or 62. A holiday magazine, which was the precursor to Travel magazine, started an awards program for the highest quality restaurants in the U.S. And Gage and Tallner's won it for 3 decades.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it did become pretty famous.
And it's open now, and it's a regular restaurant.
Right.
And I want to go to New York and eat there. I'm going to do it.
If you do, you got to hop on the subway and go over to Brooklyn or,
okay.
or take a taxi.
I can do that.
Right across the Brooklyn Bridge. It's great.
All right.
It's a beautiful place to be. It's very close to Brooklyn Heights.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Too, so
and after this, I am very interested in doing that. So I love visiting New York, and it's just a beautiful place. Okay, so you moved here, but you've been busy since you've been here, and you've drawn on your experience and education with plants and water and all those kinds. Tell us what you're doing here.
Well, I've been involved in 2 different areas. One is originally my first involvement was with the green team. So that was very much environmentally related, of course. And I helped to promote many of the residents becoming qualified as Pearl homes under the Lynnhaven River Now program, the Pearl program. And that means that they take certain steps to be environmentally sensitive and protect the bay and the river.
Great. Because you're right on the bay.
Exactly. Of course we want to protect it. And we want to protect it for generations to come. So Westminster-Canterbury had already become a Pearl business. They have 3 different programs, the Lynnhaven River Now. They have Pearl Business, Pearl home, which can build up to being a Pearl neighborhood. So that's sort of one and the same.
Okay.
And Pearl faith community.
Okay.
So the administration here had already engaged with Lynnhaven Riverdale to become a Pearl business. They were in the pilot program, actually, for becoming a Pearl business.
Great.
And one of the things they were told at that point was they should be looking at the landscape here and using more native plants, plants that, are well suited to the environment here, need less watering, but most importantly, support wildlife here.
Sure.
Support insects and birds in particular that are facing a lot of decline in the past 40 years or so, huge declines in both. They were also told to look at their lighting to see if they could do more LED, which they did, and they saved a lot of money because of that. Another thing that they've done here is to put in place a composting program, which has also saved money. So lots of things have happened because they became a Pearl business. So that was great. Then we had the drive for the Pearl homes, and once we had 30% of the apartments designated as Pearl homes, we became a Pearl neighborhood. So that was a pretty good achievement.
Yeah.
And we continue, the Green Team continues that on. I'm not on it anymore, but they continue that program on. When new residents come in, they invite them to consider becoming a Pearl home. And then we managed to get the Pearl Faith Community designation as well here for the chapel. When I left the Green Team, I became engaged in the landscape committee, and I became the chair right before we had a major renovation on the property. And of course, the whole landscape on the beach side from the living room area out to the beach was torn up during this renovation. They built the whole new living room area and the overlook. That's all part of the addition that was put in. So after that, we had to revitalize the landscape. And I had a great interest in native plants. I had been the vice president of the Virginia Native Plant Society. So I brought that expertise to the work to put the landscape back in place, and we put in about 70% native plants here.
Wow.
Over the past 5 years or so, we have about 7.5 acres of landscaped area, and about 2.5 of them now have considerable native plants in them.
Oh, that's great.
It's brought in a lot of birds and lots of butterflies too, that inspired the formation of a butterfly club, who then put their own effort into putting in place pollinator garden, specialized plants that provide nectar or are what they call host plants. That means the caterpillars feed on them. And now we see hummingbirds on the property. We have goldfinches all over the property. We have bluebirds nesting here.
Oh, that's great.
All those things weren't here before.
Wow. That's exciting.
Yeah.
You've kept busy.
Yeah, I've been busy.
And what's great is you used your education and your expertise to help our community and this community, but also Virginia Beach and the larger community, the Tidewater. Well, I want to thank you. This has been delightful talking to you.
You're welcome.
And
it's my pleasure.
I promise next chance I get, I'm going to go up to New York and eat at your father's restaurant. That sounds great. I'll still call it your father's restaurant. All right, Janet. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. And you have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening. And hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Westminster-Canterbury Tales podcast. Thank you for listening.